I would like to thank the organizers of this very timely conference, and especially this panel. Just a note on my bio. I'm the former director of the U.S. Korea Institute at Johns Hopkins because my dean and I had to shut it down last month when we got into a fight with our main anchoring donor, which was the South Korean government, great ally. Having said that, my views are, this is all entirely personal views. We witnessed really historic meeting 2 days ago between President Trump and the young leader of North Korea, Kim Jong-un, in Singapore. And while denuclearization is long ways away, the fact that this meeting happened at all is really incredible. Coming less than a year after the rhetoric, the intense rhetoric that was exchanged. And I think it's important to go back and not just discard it as rhetoric, but who said what and what that meant. President Trump threatened to wipe out the country of North Korea at a UN speech in September. Kim Jong-un preceded that with, Donald Trump with fire and fury the world has never seen if North Korea carried out its threat to attack Guam. Kim Jong-un personally, normally it's through the mouthpieces, the Nodong Shinmun, the Workers' Party, etc., saying that North Korea or the leader will say something. He personally signed off a letter calling Trump a deranged dotard, an SAT word that I did not know. Threatened to nuke Guam, test a hydrogen bomb, a surface test that had not happened since 1981. And the most important comment came on August 14th, when Defense Secretary Mathis said any missile strike near or on Guam, he said, that would be game on. And I interpreted that as a military retaliation. So what happened in Singapore is quite extraordinary. And if we can do away with North Korea's nuclear threat, then the next 10 minutes of conversation is really moot. Why? Because President Trump stated in Singapore, we have developed a very special bond. We shall see. But what if that doesn't happen, or completely not at all? That is denuclearization. What if the current talks get bogged down, which many analysts expect it to? President Trump has threatened regularly that he could walk away from the talks. So how can you deter a nuclear North Korea? In this presentation, I want to address under what conditions deterrence will likely fail. Deterrence, I think, works until it doesn't. And the US-ROK alliance has successfully deterred North Korea for the past 65 years. Overwhelming conventional capability reinforced by nuclear deterrence has maintained the peace. But does nuclear North Korea alter that scenario? I believe deterrence involves both capability and intentions of the country that is being deterred. We do not deter Canada or Germany because of their intentions are not hostile. Although if we have another G7 meeting like last one, we may. But for deterrence to be effective, the states must be rational to the infliction of punishment. And that threat of massive punishment must be credible. But with respect to the Korean Peninsula, we really have two deterrence issues: deterring North Korea from threatening the US territory directly, and extended deterrence, deterring North Korea from threatening our allies, South Korea and Japan. While they are linked, it is not the same. And so deterring North Korea from threatening the United States directly is more straightforward. When American lives on US territory are at stake, overwhelming layers of deterrence from conventional to nuclear will be credible. But reality is not so clear. the escalation of politics that leads to military conflicts is never so clear-cut. And this is where the dilemma arises when conflicts escalate. And there's simply way too many scenarios in which potential conflicts can escalate to war, from North Korean adventurism to US preemptive strike. But let's kind of go back to the situation where we faced last fall and kind of bring that up to speed. What if North Korea conducts a 7th nuclear test, especially a surface one? What if North Korea conducts a missile test for range or has a splashdown near Guam? Or that North Korea credibly demonstrates its ambition to succeed in putting a warhead on an intercontinental ballistic missile. It is not inconceivable that the US will strike militarily, with or without the approval of our South Korean ally. This, I think, last fall was what was the so-called bloody nose strategy. In those kinds of scenarios, in this particular scenario, North Korea will certainly retaliate, either striking US forces in Korea and or Japan, or striking South Korea. And will this escalate and thus get us stumbling into a second Korean War? The answer to this question may lie in the rationality of the North Korean state. Are they able to discern the infliction of punishment? Is Kim Jong-un's North Korea a rational actor? And this gets played out in Washington among policy analysts all the time. For now, I think it's the same as saying, is Kim Jong-un a rational actor? North Korea's decision-making is extremely opaque, but there is little evidence to suggest that his grip on power is in question. So he is in power. Many of my colleagues in Washington like to say this. Kim Jong-un is homicidal, but not suicidal. And hence, that deterrence will work. That is to say, Kim is a cruel. He's one bad SOB, murdering his family members and his own people, but nothing stupid to jeopardize his rule. But really, this view is more wishful thinking than anything based on evidence or testable evidence. Kim Jong-un's grip on power is just simply too short. And there has not been enough inter-Korean crises or US-North Korea crisis under his leadership that would test some of these propositions. And social science cannot accurately measure the sanity or the rationality of any given dictator. And so we're now getting some sense of what Kim Jong-un is like with high-level meetings between the United States leaders and North Korea. But until then, about 2-3 months ago, the only person who's met Kim Jong-un was Dennis Rodman. So, there's some humility in analyzing. My South Korean colleagues often tell me that they understand North Korea better. They understand Kim Jong-un better. Why? Because they're one of us. We share a cultural identity. In that case, we have a lot to worry about. Because I know plenty of well-known political leaders in South Korea, political and business leaders, who have jumped out of a building and a bridge under a lot of duress. One day they're completely rational, the next they're jumping off committing suicide. South Korea is really, has the highest level of suicide among OECD countries. And I'm sure North Korea, if we ever get to find out what their rate is, I'm sure it's quite bleak. So if there's similar cultural traits, then I would be worried about the mentality, the state of mind of Kim Jong-un. And in North Korea, Kim Jong-un, the Kim family himself is the state. His father famously said during the height of famine that he would be willing to sacrifice a couple of million North Koreans to remain in power. And so therefore, the question of preemptive strike on North Korea, will Kim respond? And if so, how intensely? in DC, and I'm sure the Pentagon has done this numerously, the conclusion is the ladder of escalation is likely to go up very, very fast, where Kim is likely to face a use it or lose it situation with his nuclear and chemical weapons. And so North Korea's all or nothing approach has been their deterrence. And in this scenario, deterrence is likely to fail. But given where we are with the meetings in Singapore, where would deterrence work? Would deterrence work in the absence of a hostile North Korean intentions? If North Korea, through the ongoing negotiation, convinces the US that its meager number of nuclear weapons, say 3 to 5, is only for defensive purposes and can assure the US with certainty that it has no hostile intentions, perhaps a no first use pledge. And here again, I'm borrowing the terms and phrases that we are currently using on North Korea. Here, deterrence could work until situation changes, until intentions change, either by the United States or by North Korea. And then we fall back to that dilemma, that cycle of whether military option is only viable policy instrument. Again, any conflict can quickly escalate. So as I was thinking about other opportunities or other approaches to deterrence, one that the South Koreans have been practicing and thinking about, if one concludes that Kim Jong-un's #1 priority is self-preservation at all costs, then a credible threat to decapitate his regime may be more credible than threatening with the use of force to knock out some missile sites and or nuclear reactors and installations. This is South Korea's answer to North's nuclear blackmail capability. Again, the challenge is how can one convey the decapitation threat convincingly? As we go forward, perhaps we're able to get a better intelligence of Kim's whereabouts. During the negotiation process, we may be able to get that kind of information. Perhaps a limited strike or bloody nose will convey that message. Or the threat of capturing him and bringing him to the International Criminal Court for prosecution for human rights abuse might be that credible threat as well. But the flip side of that deterrence is our credibility to deter. And will the US threat of nuclear retaliation remain credible? And in what circumstances will it not be credible? A case in which our own credibility of deterrence fails is when extended deterrence fails because our alliance relationship becomes frayed. I think while this scenario is less likely with Japan, there is more possibility with US ally South Korea. And it would not be a stretch in which South Korea's domestic politics is affected by the worsening of US-North Korea relations, as it had occurred under the President Roh Moo-hyun back in 2002 to about 2005. So can we envision a scenario in the next 12 to 18 months where US-North Korea relations go nowhere, completely breaks down, and open hostility returns? At the same time, South Korea has made considerable progress in inter-Korean relations, large infrastructure investment, tourism, establishment of economic zones. When I talk to the South Korean analysts affiliated with the current government, a part of ramping up inter-Korean relations strategy has been to thwart any likelihood of US preemptive strike over North Korea. So what if the US again is seriously contemplating a military option arising from North Korea's proliferation of nuclear technology and ballistic missiles, continued missile development? Can we envision a scenario where US-ROK relations are so strained that while the alliance is not abrogated, the relationship is nevertheless broken? And in this context, simply, would we trade San Francisco for Seoul? The success of extended deterrence rests on deterring the adversary and at the same time maintaining the close relationship with that ally. In the Korean Peninsula, it is possible that common interests and values may deteriorate rapidly. And this is not something you wake up and do, but it's incremental. There are precedents. Certainly, President Trump's announcement that war games are going to be halted, calling them provocative without letting our allies know. It just sets precedent of mistrust. So let me end with a battle lab experience that I had at the US Air Force Academy a few years ago. So while touring Air Force Academy, a colleague of mine said, hey, you want to see a battle lab? And as a civilian, I'd never seen a battle lab. You know, in a big screen, you have an actual war game going with China. And so different shapes representing US and US ally assets. We're in a war with China. Chinese ships are disappearing. I think a triangle symbol representing B-2 bombers are making deep inland strikes, followed by Chinese ballistic missiles flying into Japan, some disappearing, and I'm assuming missile defense working, while some landing, and the exercise was concluded with missiles coming over towards the United States. Once the exercise was over, I noted that not a single plane took off from the Korean Peninsula. And the reply that I got was that it was not coded in. Yes, we told the programmer not to code in because, one, Air Force really doesn't have a whole lot of assets in Korea. And the programmers were sensitive to South Korea's difficult position it would be in between the United States and China. And I thought to myself, are you kidding me? We are at war with China, and not a single plane takes off from Korea, our ally? That is the end of the alliance. But even for gaming purposes, the credibility of commitment of an ally was questioned. And lack of trust cuts both ways. And again, things like canceling war games or South Korea's diplomatic balancing between China and the US, where we feel slighted by what they say when they come to Washington and what they do when they go to Beijing. These kinds of actions can chip away the trust that is at the heart of an alliance relationship. And when that happens, I think extended deterrence will likely to fail.